Darkness more brilliant than 10 billion suns, darkness through which the world is begun. Darkness more brilliant than 10 billion suns, darkness through which the world is begun. Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, the luminous star. Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, the luminous star. Darkness more brilliant than 10 billion suns, darkness through which the world is begun. Darkness more brilliant than 10 billion suns, darkness through which the world is begun. Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, Aswad Nurani, the luminous star. Welcome, everyone. I suspect others will come online as they are able. And, God willing, everyone stays warm and cozy as we here in the Portland metro area have our first snowstorm of the year and probably the only snowstorm of the year. We woke up this morning to everything out here in the gorge covered in ice, and the actual snow didn't start until later in the day, but it's good to be warm and cozy in front of a fire. So since none of you were actually with us last month, we had a whole other crew of folks. Oh, looks like somebody's trying to join. Okay, there we go. There we go. So just to give you a little bit of background of what this is, the Jewish monthly holiday of Rosh Chodesh, it's the head of the month, the new month, has always been a time for the divine feminine and for women to gather in circle. In this day and age, I'm opening that circle broader. So Tom is with us, and we had another gentleman who was going to join us, and hopefully he will. But it's a time where we connect not only with the moon, but with Mother Earth and with all the divine forces that have feminine attributes that we call on. So this particular month, last month, we focused on the primal mother, that archetype, which is the creative force of Gaia. And this month, we're looking at the divine feminine in its maiden aspect. And we'll be exploring the relationship to this month with Imbolc, which happens in the pagan tradition just a couple of weeks ago, or last week it may have been, on the 2nd. I've lost all track of time during COVID, so pardon me on that. But then later this month, we'll also be celebrating the Jewish holiday of Purim. So this month, which is that this new moon begins, is the Jewish month of Adar, which is called a season of joy. So what I'd like to invite us each to do is to unmute and introduce ourselves, giving your name, your pronoun, and what you are joyous about this year, in this particular season. And I'm Rivka, and my pronouns are she and her. And in addition to being joyful about having Leor home, I'm really cherishing the slow pace of this winter season. It's been, in spite of all of the heartaches people are going through on so many levels and so much trauma that we've experienced as a nation between illness and divisiveness. I'm also celebrating how many people are getting back in touch with the most basic parts of our lives, our families, our sense of connection, even when we can't be in the same space. The ways that the earth continues to take care of us. One of the reasons that I designed this particular Rosh Chodesh program as an interspiritual and multi-gendered experience is because I think all of us right now need a sense of that divine feminine. We need to feel that sense of nurturing that our sacred mother can give us after all of the heartache and all the trauma. And we also need to give some love and nurturance back to the planet Earth, our Mother Earth. And so it seemed to me that utilizing this particular tradition of coming together at the new moon, a time of inward introspection, a time of dreaming into possibility, a time of connecting with the tides of the seas and of our own bodies, was an ideal time and way for us to reconnect and to make holy once more our connection with the divine in each other's eyes, as well as the divine in the world around us. So I'm going to start us with a little teaching. One of the things that many of us don't know the stories of the divine feminines who have been the archetypes that have been part of our truth and part of our reality. And one of the things that is particularly poignant for me about the month of Adar, we've heard from the rabbis for generations how, perplexing it is that God is never seen in the Purim story, that God is somehow hidden, just like Esther's Jewish identity is hidden. But that's not exactly true. The male aspect of that which is holy may be hidden in this story, but hidden in plain sight is the divine feminine. One of the things that Rabbi Jill Hammer speaks about and teaches so eloquently, and I'll quote her in a little bit here. The goddess Ishtar was the first goddess of love and of war. She was the patroness of Babylon, along with the male god Marduk, pardon me. Cartoons, Marduk, pardon me, which is probably where we get Marmaduke, is Marduk. At any rate, we hear both of their names echoed in Esther and Mordecai. And the month of the celebration of Purim also comes from this same tradition, because it is the Babylonian word for choosing lots. It was the time of year each spring when, by lot, the king's new advisor would be chosen. And throughout that spring celebration, we can be sure that the protectors of Ishtar and Marduk were part of that experience of guiding and holding sacred the container that was the community of Babylon. The Jews spent time in exile in Babylon. And up until that point, the divine feminine in the form of Asherah lived somewhat amicably with the Hebrew God in the land of Canaan. It wasn't until the exile that all forms of the divine feminine were closed off from our story, even though that they were woven into our story. We hear about Ishtar in the Bible. She's referred to in the Bible as the Queen of Heaven. And one of the biggest challenges that our patriarchal tradition had with Ishtar was the fact that women were the priestesses, and they participated in what was called the sacred marriage. It was ritualized sensuality that celebrated the fertility not only of the land, but of the people. It was a sacred marriage between the high priestess and that of the king of Babylon. The way it's translated in Torah is that they were temple prostitutes. The patriarchy of our tradition couldn't quite handle the women having that kind of voice, and began to strip even from our own traditions of sacred feminine in El Shaddai being the great breasted one into becoming the Almighty. making the faces of the divine aspects that were feminine in nature almost completely hidden, with the exception of the Shekinah. And even she was hidden in a way because she was the indwelling presence. So how do we see Ishtar and Esther in the same story, in the Purim story? Just as the priestess of Ishtar would join with the king in the ritual of sacred marriage, so too we see Esther marrying King Ahasuerus, the king of Babylon. Just as Ahasuerus' first wife, Vashti, was commanded to dance naked in front of the partygoers, the legends and myths around Ishtar saw her slowly, over the course of a descent into the underworld, being stripped of her jewelry, her rank, her personhood, eventually her clothing, so that she entered the underworld completely naked. And then we see the same parallel as her descent in the fact that Esther spent 3 days in prayer and in fasting, preparing herself for going before the king. We see both Esther and Ishtar reclaiming their majesty, becoming adorned in the glory of their as it's called, regnal attire. And in both cases, they step into their power. In the case of Esther, she steps into her power to speak truth to power and tell Ahasuerus that Haman is planning on killing all of the Jews. So basically a story that has been with us in one form or another over millennia. The story of Ishtar is very much the same story as Persephone, and as we'll learn a little bit later about the goddess Bridget in the British Isles. They are the maiden goddess. They are the one who descends into the darkness to bring back spring, to bring back possibility, and to bring back hope. Rabbi Hammer goes on to say that, I said that already, never mind. The last piece I want to say about this is the Zohar, which is our mystical teachers from about 500, 600 years ago within Judaism, also saw Esther as an avatar for the Shekinah when they wrote, Esther puts on the royalty, the Malchut. What is the meaning of Malchut? If you think it is the glorious and purple garments, these are not Malchut. She was clothed in supernal Malchut, Shekinah. She was enveloped in the Holy Spirit.
I'm gonna head downstairs.
We have these women hiding in plain sight in some of our oldest stories. Just as the Jewish tradition tried very hard to hide the divine feminine in the form of Ishtar, so too the Catholics tried to hide Bridget. Both of these goddesses were goddesses of the sun. They were both referred to as the Queen of Heaven, the star of morning and night. They're associated, each of them is associated with the planet Venus. Each of them are the patrons of fire. They're the goddesses of fire. In Bridget's case, she is also the goddess of the well. They both are the patrons of poets and the hearth and the smiths who create things of beauty. They control not only the fires of home, but the fires of creativity and the fires being reborn in the form of the return of the sun and the greening of the planet. In Bridget's case, her mantle, her cloak, is green because it represents the greening of Ireland in the spring. And it's also said of Saint Bridget that her cloak was a cloak of magic. When she asked a chieftain if she could build a monastery, he said, sure, but you can only have as much land as your cloak can cover. Her cloak covered a vast area, an area that has now become the area called Kildare in Ireland. Kildare means Church of the Oak. It's right by a sacred oak grove that was dedicated to Bridget, and beside a well that has stood for the test of time and for millennia, not only when it was a pagan site, but when it became a Catholic monastery. Nuns have lit, it previously was priestesses, but in more recent centuries, nuns have tended the eternal fire. And Bridget's holiday, Imbolc, has been transformed into Candlemas, when people take candles to church to be blessed. The ways that we tie in and give these women our joy, where they teach us to be creative, where they invite us to create hearts and homes, they're still speaking to us. So what I'd like for us to do is all unmute. And does everybody have the handout? Can I see a show of hands of who's got it? Okay. So those of us that do have the handout, I'd like us to say a poem. It's the oldest known poem in existence, dedicated to Ishtar, written in 1600 before the Common Era. So I invite us into the wellspring that was the foremother of Esther. So I have mine in big print so that I can find it, but I have to find the right sheet. There it is. Okay.
So we're reading that.
I will enjoy listening to it, even though I don't have it in hand. I'm very interested.
So Tom, do you want to start us? And then me, and then Justin and Jessica, you have a copy. And I couldn't, did I see it? And then Becca and Jesse. So we'll go in that order.
Praise the goddess, the most awesome of the goddesses. Let one revere the mistress of the peoples, the greatest of the Gigi. Praise Ishtar, the most awesome of the goddesses. Let us revere the queen of women, the greatest of the Igigi.
She's clothed in pleasure and love. She's laden with vitality, charm, and voluptuousness. Ishtar is clothed in pleasure and love. She is laden with vitality, charm, and voluptuousness.
In lips she is sweet, life is in her mouth. At her appearance, rejoicing becomes full. She is glorious. Veils are thrown over her head. Her figure is beautiful. Her eyes are brilliant.
The goddess, with her there is counsel, the fate of everything she holds in her hand. At her glance there is created joy, power, magnificence, the protecting deity and guardian spirit.
She dwells in, she pays heed to compassion and friendliness. Besides, agreeableness she truly possesses. Be it slave, unattached girl, or mother, she preserves her. One calls on her. Among women, one names her name.
Jess? Jesse, were you going to read the next? You're muted. There you go.
Who, to her greatness, who can be equal? Strong, exalted, splendid are her decrees. Ishtar, to her greatness, who can be equal? Strong, exalted, splendid are her decrees.
Mhm.
She is sought after among the gods. Extraordinary is her station. Respected is her word. It is supreme over them. Ishtar among the gods. Extraordinary in her station. Respected is her word. It is supreme over them.
She is their queen. She continually caused her commands to be executed. All of them bow down to her. They receive her light before her. Women and men indeed revere her.
In their assembly, her word is powerful. It is dominating. Before Anum, their king, she fully supports them. She rests in intelligence, cleverness, and wisdom. They take counsel together, she and her lord.
Indeed, they occupy the throne room together. In the divine chamber, the dwelling of joy. Before them, the gods take their places. To their utterances, their attention is turned.
The king, their favorite, beloved of their hearts, magnificently offers to them his pure sacrifices. Amidinatana, as the pure offering of his hands, brings before them fat oxen and gazelles.
From Anum, her consort, she has been pleased to ask for him, in enduring a long life. Many years of living to Amiditana she has granted. Ishtar has decided to give.
By her orders, she has subjected to him the 4 world regions at his feet, and the total of all peoples. She has decided to attach them to his yoke.
So she's celebrated. And by she, I mean the divine feminine in her maiden aspect. We think of maidens as being pure and innocent, but they were about that creative possibility. They were about this moment in the cycle of Mother Earth, where things are just starting to come back to life, and all of a sudden, in the very short moment, after the snow stops, everything is going to burst forth, the crocus and the daffodils and the cherry blossoms. It's about exuberance in nature and remembering that we are all part of the joy of the cycles of creation. I'd like to invite us into a little bit of conversation about what we've talked about so far, and then we're going to go into a bit of a meditation. But I wanted to open it up to any thoughts or musings that these materials have bubbling up for you.
Who was Ishtar classified? She was a Babylonian god. Was she classified as the, so to speak, as the goddess of fertility or the goddess of light, or?
Right. She was a sun goddess. She was goddess of fertility. She was the goddess of love and war, things of passion.
I see.
She oversaw all of that. And she was also very connected, as was Bridget, with beyond fertility in and of itself, with creating home, with creating community. She was the protector of all of Babylon. She's known as other names in Mesopotamia. She's also known as Inanna and Ashtoreth. She appears in many places, but Ishtar is the name that is most often reflected in terms of that dual presence of passion that is both love and war.
Was she the most important god in Babylonia?
Yes, yeah, she definitely was. I think that's why she had the moniker as being the Queen of Heaven.
I see. Very, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Was there a god in Egypt with a name similar to that?
So you're thinking of Isis.
Yes.
And yes, Isis there was definitely a relationship between Isis and Ishtar. In both cases, they had a consort who was sort of a son, husband person who she would go, and it's really the same story as that of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. The mother whose son dies, who she brings back time and time again every season. I mean, every spring season.
Interesting. Could we say that in some of the ancient religions they were more female oriented as far as their gods and being more higher in the hierarchy in ancient religions? Can we make some sort of a generalization, or is that?
The ancient traditions had both male and female gods, but they believed that the creative force was dominantly female.
Okay, interesting. Very, very interesting.
I just wanted to share a musing that a while ago, I kind of skimmed through and read through Women Who Run with the Wolves. And there were some things in there that I really enjoyed, but it didn't feel like a book I needed to read or hear at that time in my life. So I enjoyed the stories and I just thought it was interesting. But recently I picked it up again, and it feels like sometimes that happens to me. It's like, this is the book I'm supposed to be reading right now, because this is the thing that I'm yearning for, is to be more connected to my wild, the wild in me, and the wild feminine in me. And this just, so many things that you said, basically we just read, I was reading to Jessica in the kitchen as she was cooking, and some of the things that you said here, and the way that as patriarchy took over and as civilizations progressed, the stories, the women in stories were altered in so many different ways. And really to be made, to be something to be afraid of, or to be shamed, sinful, dark, and to be kept down, to tame. And so really I just think it's cool that I sat down and you're reaffirming that this is the right message in this moment, for me to be hearing and paying attention to, and be reminded of. And the way that early people all over the world honored the divine feminine, honored the wild feminine. And it's a huge part of why we need healing in our world today, because how much that's been tamped down, forgotten, altered. Well, thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, I think one of the reasons I think that the divine feminine is calling to people again is because we have been so out of balance. The Eastern folk remind us that we all have feminine and masculine within us. And being able to tap into those qualities, being able to tap into the divine feminine within us, whether we are male presenting or female presenting, whether we're cisgendered or transgendered, in being able to touch into that which is our source of tenderness, our source of vulnerability, our sense of power and creativity and abandon that breaks beyond the constraints of fear. We talk a lot about the choices of life being between fear and love, and to choose love. But to be able to choose love, we have to soften that which we have fear around, and instead of the boxes that we put ourselves in to protect ourselves from the fear. Any other thoughts?
I'll just say that, I've been thinking a lot and or contemplating a lot about the divine feminine and how I want to bring that forth. And definitely it's been in my consciousness that that's what we're needing so much of these days. Yeah, and it's such a healing force. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I love the part about diving into the darkness to reclaim hope.
Yes. You know, particularly right now when things that, you know, in the last, 400 years especially, but for even longer, since 1492, dark has been vilified, and people who are of dark complexion have been made to be perceived as evil. One of the things that the Jewish mystics got right is the luminous dark as well as the luminous light, that the fire on the page, there are the letters, are incomplete without also seeing the fire on the page that is the space between the letters, because that's where possibility is. If there's any one last question, and then I'm going to take us into a meditation.
I'm just struck by how much beauty is threaded throughout this poem, and how active beauty is as a principle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For those of us who grew up in the dominant culture, particularly with the English translations of scripture, we're led to believe that, if it's not strictly within the patriarchy, if it's female bodies, if it's African Americans or indigenous peoples, if it's the wilderness, that it's supposed to be something that scares us. And so Ishtar and any of the other early goddesses are evil and have to be, pushed into the dark. And yet when you read a poem like this, you know that they shared as much a sense of joy and a sense of complexity and beauty in their appreciation of the divine as we do today. So I'm going to take us into a meditation. And if you have a candle with you that isn't lit yet, go ahead and light it. If you don't have a candle with you, you can gaze into the ones on my mantle or the fire that is here. Settle into a comfortable spot. Let your eyes soften on the gaze of the flame. As the flame was sacred to both manifestations of the divine feminine, I invite you to step into the comfort of knowing that we have a long lineage that recognizes the illumination and the possibility that is in a flame. Sit with the divine feminine within you, the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah was said to become the pillar of fire which guided the Hebrew people on their journey to the promised land. As you gaze into the flame, a couple of questions to ask yourself. What is she guiding you towards? What does the flame illuminate in your life? What creative fire needs to be kindled? When you're ready, slowly return your gaze into the room. Feel your feet on the ground. And we're going to step into a second process. The Catholic tradition has a spiritual practice called Lectio Divina. It's where it's translated as sacred writing. Take just a couple of minutes, 5 at the most. I'm going to put some music on to have in the background to write, either journal, write a poem. Maybe what comes forward for you isn't in words, but is in pictures. But allow yourself to put down in a concrete form the musings of your heart that came either in the meditation or in the conversation or the earlier readings, so that you can embody them for yourselves. So I'm going to put some music on, one song that welcomes the creative juices of Bridget, or in her ancestral name and Gaelic, Breed, in this case. So at the end of that song, we'll come back together and have another conversation. So I'd like to invite folks to unmute if they would like, and if there's anything you'd like to share about the meditation or the writing that bubbled up for you, please share with us. I'd like to, if anyone doesn't have anything that they want to share, I want to invite you to begin to seal this process with a small ritual. If you have your bowl of water and your sage, we're going to do a two-part ritual. Both fire and water have been sources of purification, making a fresh start. So we're going to use both to both bless what we have written, bless what has come up for us, that they might be planted, as it were, watered, given fresh air to grow into possibility in the coming month. So if you'll take your bowl of water.
Is there still time to speak an intention, or I just
Absolutely.
took too long? Sorry.
That's all right.
That's all right.
Just want to share a little bit of what came through. It's about, for me, holding space for that divine feminine by harnessing my inner strength. So consistently harnessing the strength to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to speak my truth, and then to also release undue concern for how I am perceived by others. So trusting in my own self-love and self-awareness, and in that way becoming, holding space to be that channel for the divine feminine to come through in service of healing and compassion and wisdom.
Beautiful, Becca.
Thank you.
Well, I will share too. So I'm pondering a lot of things in my life right now. And as I mentioned, my husband has some very serious health issues. And I ponder the future, and I thought to myself that I would like to be in the future without focusing so much on myself. I would like to think of myself as a giver. I would like to focus my energy, my desires, my restlessness into being, I just came up with that word, a giver of myself. And in terms of to others, a giver of warmth, of kindness, support, a giver of the feeling that I'm not being judgmental, and a giver, I would like to be able to convey a feeling to others that in my presence you are nurtured. You should feel nurtured. This is, I think, the divine feminine that I'd like to feel coming through in my life. And I would like to be that person and not so focused on myself. I'm a little beyond in my years worrying so much about my image. But what I do wonder and ponder is how I will be nurtured, where I will get the fuel, so to speak, to be this person that I want to be. Because this thought of the divine feminine coming through is it touches me. It's very poignant, and I would like to be that kind of a force. But I also know that I'm going to have to find something that will nurture me and fuel me in the future. It's not very clear what I'm saying, I don't think, but
It is.
feelings are just pouring out. Just came out that in that fashion. Yeah. And,
We do have to be nurtured to be able to nurture others.
yes.
That's one of the things that we've not done well as a people in our current paradigm, is we push and push and push until we don't have anything left to give. So that's actually a very beautiful goal to be nurtured.
This is where I'm at, and right now in my life, and this concept of the divine feminine is very, very interesting for me. Very interesting indeed.
Thanks, Maya.
Thank you.
Anyone else, or are we ready to move into ritual? Either is fine. Okay, so you'll take the water. Let your fingers first just play in the water. Part of joy, part of nurturance is allowing ourselves to play. I invite you to take your wet fingers and touch each of your eyes with the water, as well as the third eye. And we ask that the divine feminine flow through us, that she help us to see all that we are capable of, and that whatever has bubbled up for us in this process this evening or in the coming days, may, with the waters of spring, be nurtured, and grow. And next, I invite you to take your smudge stick or your incense, whichever you have, and light it in your candle. Whoops. Okay, candle, come back. Come on, smudge stick. You can do this. There we go. Now we have smoke. Our indigenous ancestors knew that whether it was the light of a Shabbos candle or the smoke of a smudge stick, that the smoke was very healing and cleansing. And our scientists have learned now that the very act of smudging literally does clear the air. My flames are not being very cooperative today. Really does clean and purify the noxious particles that are around us. So bathe yourself in the smoke. Breathe it in. Be inspired by the divine feminine. Let the smoke fill your senses. Invite the divine feminine in, that indwelling presence that is our creativity, that is our compassion, that is our hope. Breathe in the Shekhinah, breathe in the divine feminine, that she may walk with you and in you throughout this coming month. It's no wonder that fire on altars has been a source of connection for spirit everywhere on this planet. It's about the light of hope, the light of joy, the light of illumination. I'm going to do a final chant to seal this ritual. It's a chant by Rabbi Shefa Gold. Let it wash over you. And if you pick it up, even though we can't have everybody unmuted, because it becomes a cacophony, go ahead and join in. Eish tamid tukar al hamifeya lo tikfer lo tikfer. Eish tamid tukar al hamifeya lo tikfer lo tikfer. Eish tamid tukar al hamifeya lo tikfer lo tikfer. Fire always shall be burning on the altar. It shall not go out. So the last element of the evening is blessing the new moon, the new month of Adar. Does anyone have any blessings they want to lift up before we say the formal prayer? Okay. So read along with me. May the month of Adar be a month of blessings, blessings of goodness, blessings of joy, peace and kindness, friendship and love, creativity, strength, serenity, fulfilling work and dignity, satisfaction, success and sustenance, physical health and radiance. May truth and justice guide our acts and compassion temper our lives, that we may blossom as we age and become our sweetest selves. May it be so. So as we close, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Folks have woven in and out as we've done this. I've got a couple of people who were planning on coming tonight who couldn't for family reasons. I'll be holding this space every month, and I invite you and hope that you will join us again when it works for you. So the last song that I'm going to sing as our closing song is a song by Debbie Friedman, who is one of the most beloved of the modern Hebrew songwrites. And this is a song that she's dedicated to the new moon that is completely in English. So it's an easier one for people to catch on to. A sliver, a quarter, a half and full light, revealing yourself in the darkness of night. And we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. This is the cycle, the rhythm of time. Days turn to weeks, into months, into years. And we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. A sliver, a quarter, a half and full heart, revealing the mysteries that set us apart. And we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. It sleeps in the winter, awakening spring. Light kisses summer, igniting the fall, and we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. A sliver, a quarter, a half, and then whole, renewed by your presence, touching the soul, and we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. It is new, it is ours, we see it again. It's sacred, it has no beginning, no end. And we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. A sliver, a quarter, a half and full light, revealing yourself in the darkness of night. And we go round and round and round, and we go round and round. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. And may this month of Adar, from now till the next new moon, be one of joy and hope and delight in each of your lives. Thank you.